the strong rancher, and the shy new worker. A soft cowboy love story, Cowboy Secrets. The first time Eli Calloway ever saw Noah Reyes cry. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the sun hadn't even decided yet whether it was going to show up. Eli had been awake since 4, the way he always was, the way his father had been before him, and his grandfather before that. The ranch didn't wait for sleep. The cattle didn't care about your exhaustion or your dreams or the way your back had started aching in the cold. So Eli was already dressed, already booted, already halfway across the east field with a thermos of black coffee in his hand, when he saw the shape of a person sitting on the old fence post near the creek bed. He stopped walking. It wasn't unusual for a ranch hand to be up early. He'd hired 4 new workers just last week to help with the spring season, and any one of them could have been out there. But something about the way this figure sat, shoulders curved inward, head bowed just slightly, arms wrapped around themselves like they were trying to hold something together, made Eli slow his steps. Instead of calling out, he got closer, and then he heard it. Soft, barely audible over the sound of the creek, and the low distant moan of cattle waking up. A sound that wasn't crying exactly, but was something just before it. The held breath of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. Eli stopped about 10 feet away. The figure heard him then. A sharp intake of breath, a sudden straightening of the spine, a hand moving quickly to a face. When the young man turned around, his eyes were red at the edges, and there was a kind of desperate composure on his face that Eli recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had been caught feeling something they thought they were supposed to hide. He was young, maybe 20, 21. Dark hair that curled a little at the temples. A face that was handsome in an unassuming way, the kind of handsome that didn't announce itself. And those eyes, dark brown and wide, and currently filled with something Eli couldn't name but felt. Somehow, like a weight, he understood. "I'm sorry," the young man said, his voice rough at the edges. "I didn't think anyone would be out here this early." Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he held out the thermos. The young man blinked, confused. "Coffee's hot," Eli said. "You look like you need it more than I do." His name was Noah Reyes. He was 21 years old. He had driven 11 hours from San Antonio with everything he owned packed into a single duffel bag and a guitar case strapped to the roof of a car. So old it had no business making a trip that long. He had answered an ad in a ranching forum online: seasonal ranch hands needed, experience preferred but not required. Room and board provided, and he had shown up 2 days before Eli expected him, which was why no one had shown him to his bunk yet, and why he had spent his first night sleeping in his car, parked just off the gravel road that led to the Calloway property. Eli found all of this out over the course of about 15 minutes. Standing at the fence by the creek in the pale gray light of early morning, watching Noah hold the thermos with both hands like it was the steadiest thing in his world right now. "You slept in your car," Eli said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement issued in the particular flat tone he used when something both irritated and concerned him at once. "Just one night," Noah said quickly. "I got the dates mixed up. I didn't want to knock on anyone's door at midnight, so I just—" "Why didn't you call?" Noah looked at the thermos. "I didn't want to seem like a problem before I even started." Something shifted very slightly in Eli's chest at that. Something he didn't examine too closely, not yet. Not standing out there in the cold with a stranger who had been crying alone at a fence post. He just filed it away, the way he did with most things that felt complicated. "Come on," he said instead. "I'll show you to your bunk. You can eat breakfast with the rest of the hands at 6. Noah stood up from the fence, and Eli noticed then that he was tall, nearly as tall as Eli himself. Though where Eli was broad and solid in the way of someone who had spent every day of his life doing physical work, Noah was leaner, like someone who was still growing into himself in some way that had nothing to do with height. He handed the thermos back. "Thank you," he said, and the way he said it quietly, with a kind of directness that didn't perform gratitude but simply offered it, made Eli nod once and turn toward the main house without another word. Noah followed, his boots soft on the wet grass, and neither of them spoke again until they reached the bunkhouse. But Eli glanced back once, just once, and Noah was looking at the sky, which had finally decided to show up in a long line of deep pink along the horizon. And the expression on his face was something very close to wonder. Eli looked away. He had a ranch to run. The Callaway Ranch was 430 acres of working cattle land in the hill country of central Texas. It had been in the Callaway family for 3 generations, though by the time it reached Eli at the age of 19, 2 years after his father's passing, and 1 year after his mother moved to Dallas to be closer to her sister, it had been in a state of managed decline, not failure. The Callaways didn't do failure, but a kind of quiet erosion that came from too few hands and too much pride and a stubborn refusal to ask for help. Eli had spent 3 years rebuilding it, alone at first, then with 1 hired hand, then 2, and now, in his 22nd year, with a crew of 5 seasonal workers and a spread that was finally beginning to look the way it had in the photographs on his father's office wall, he was proud of it in a way. He couldn't explain to people who hadn't grown up on land. It wasn't just pride in what he'd done. It was something older and quieter, a feeling of belonging to a place, of being responsible for it in a way that went deeper than ownership. He explained none of this to Noah. What he did was hand him a pair of work gloves, point to the east pasture fence line that needed mending, and say, "You ever done any fencing before?" Noah looked at the gloves, then at the fence, then at Eli. "No," he said honestly. "I'll teach you," Eli said, and then he picked up the post hole digger and started walking. The thing about teaching someone a physical skill, Eli had discovered, was that it told you things about them that conversation never could. You learned how they handled frustration, whether they quit early or ground through it. You learned how they listened, whether they watched carefully or just waited for you to finish talking. You learned how they moved in space, whether they were aware of their own body or clumsy with themselves. And you learned whether they were the kind of person who needed encouragement or just needed to be left alone to figure things out. Noah, as it turned out, was the second kind. He watched Eli demonstrate setting a post with a focus that was almost uncomfortable in its intensity. Not the unfocused watching of someone being polite, but the sharp attention of someone actually trying to understand the mechanics of what they were seeing. And when Eli stepped back and nodded for him to try, Noah didn't hesitate. He picked up the digger, positioned himself, and tried. He was terrible at it. The angle was wrong, the force was off, and after 3 strokes, he had barely made a dent. He didn't say anything. He adjusted his grip, repositioned his feet, and tried again. Still wrong, but less wrong. Eli watched him make 4 adjustments over the course of 10 minutes, each one bringing him slightly closer to the right technique, and not once did he ask for help or look over for reassurance. When he finally got it the right angle, the right force, the post hole deepening in smooth, even strokes, he looked up at Eli with an expression that was equal parts surprise and satisfaction. And Eli felt something move in the back of his throat that he had no word for. "Good," he said. Noah nodded. Went back to digging. Eli turned away. "Good," he thought to himself. "Keep it simple. Keep it professional. He's a ranch hand. You have a ranch to run." The other hands were a mixed group. There was Marcus, 25, and from Oklahoma, who had worked cattle since he was 12, and moved through the ranch with an easy confidence that Eli appreciated. There was Pete, 40-something and weathered, who didn't talk much but worked hard and kept to himself. There were the Garza brothers, twin cousins from Uvalde named Danny and Ray, who were 23, loud, funny, and occasionally exasperating, and who had taken an immediate liking to Noah in the way that certain confident people always take 2 shy ones with the cheerful, slightly possessive energy of people who have decided to adopt someone. Eli noticed this from a distance on Noah's second day. Danny and Ray had flanked him at breakfast, and were talking over each other in the way they always did. And Noah was sitting between them with his coffee mug held close to his chest, and he was quiet, but, and this was the thing Eli noticed, he was smiling. A small smile, slightly sideways, the kind that happened when someone found something genuinely amusing, but was too reserved to show it fully. It was the first time Eli had seen him smile. He looked away from it quickly and asked Marcus about the water situation in the north tank. But for the rest of the morning, something sat in his chest in a way he couldn't shake. By the end of the first week, the shape of Noah Reyes had become familiar in the landscape of the ranch, in the way that new things sometimes suddenly felt like they had always been there. He was methodical in his work, always finishing what he started before he moved to the next thing. He was early to every task, and late to quit. He had an instinct for the animals that surprised Eli, not a trained understanding, but a natural ease, the way he moved near the horses without startling them, the way the cattle settled when he moved among them slowly and without urgency. He was also, Eli noticed, a person of deep quiet, not the uncomfortable quiet of someone who had nothing to say, but the particular quiet of someone who had decided that they would only say things worth saying. When he did speak, in those early days, it was usually to ask a question or to confirm an instruction, and his questions were always good ones, specific, functional. The questions of someone who was paying attention. Eli found, to his own mild surprise, that he had started to look forward to them. He was checking the water levels in the south tank on a Thursday afternoon when Noah appeared beside him, slightly out of breath, as if he'd been walking fast. The herd in the east pasture, Noah said. 2 of the calves are separated from their mothers. I didn't know if I should do anything or show me, Eli said immediately. Already moving, they walked quickly back across the pasture, and Noah talked as they went, describing what he'd seen in a calm and organized way. And Eli found himself listening not just to the information, but to the quality of the voice, steady, careful, slightly lower than you expected when you first saw him. The calves were exactly where Noah had said. They were fine, young and skittish, but not distressed, separated by a portion of fence that had sagged and confused the herd's movement. Eli moved them back through a gate while Noah held it, and within 20 minutes the situation was resolved. The calves back with their mothers, the fence section noted for repair. Good catch, Eli said. Noah looked at the ground. A faint color crossed his cheekbones that Eli told himself was just from the exertion of walking fast. I've been trying to learn the herd, Noah said quietly. Their patterns. How long have you been watching them? Since the first morning. He paused. I like watching how they move together, how they know things about each other without having to say them. Eli looked at him. Noah seemed to realize, suddenly, that this was a strange thing to say out loud to your employer, and the color on his cheekbones deepened. Sorry, he said. That probably sounded. No, Eli said. It didn't, and then, because he didn't know what else to do with the warmth that had settled in his sternum, he turned and walked toward the barn. He told himself he was thinking about the fence repair. He was not thinking about the fence repair. The bunkhouse had a covered porch on the south side that faced out over a long slope of pasture toward a distant line of cedar trees. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, the hands would sometimes gather there, someone with a beer, someone with cards, always the Garza brothers arguing about something that had happened earlier in the day and making it sound funnier in the retelling than it had been in the moment. Eli rarely joined them. He had a habit of ending his days at the desk in his father's old office in the main house, working through invoices and supply orders and the thousand small administrative tasks that no one else could do. He told himself this was because the work needed to be done. He did not examine too closely the fact that he had been spending evenings alone in that office since he was 19 years old and had never once thought to change it. But on the 11th day of Noah's employment on the Callaway Ranch, Eli walked past the bunkhouse porch on his way back from the equipment shed and stopped, because there was music not from the porch itself, from around the side of the building, out of sight of the main gathering, and not the country radio station that played from someone's speaker most evenings, but something live and quiet, a guitar, played with a lightness that was very different from the heavy chord patterns most people defaulted to. Eli stood very still for a moment. Then he walked around the corner of the BUNKHOUSE. Noah was sitting on an overturned feed bucket. His back against the wooden wall, guitar across his lap, head bent over the strings. He was playing something that didn't quite have a name. It wasn't a song Eli recognized. Or if it was, it had been taken apart and rebuilt into something quieter and more interior. His fingers moved slowly, finding the notes with a kind of deliberate gentleness, and his eyes were closed. He looked completely unlike himself, or rather, he looked completely like himself in a way that his working hours hadn't revealed yet Eli should have kept. Walking he stayed. He leaned against the corner of the building, in the shadow where the porch light didn't reach, and he listened. The music moved through him in a way he hadn't expected, not the dramatic stirring of something grand, but the softer disturbance of something real. The way a memory sometimes arrived without warning, and settled in your chest before you could prepare for it. He thought about his father. He wasn't sure why. He thought about the photographs on the office wall. He thought about the sound. This place made after dark, when there was no wind, a kind of enormous, patient silence that he had lived inside of for so long that he sometimes forgot it was a sound at all. Noah's fingers stilled on the strings. In the silence that followed, Eli stepped back. But his boot found a loose piece of gravel, and the sound it made was small but clear in the quiet evening air. Noah's eyes opened. He turned toward the sound, and for a moment, 3 full seconds, maybe 4, they looked at each other across the dark space between the corner of the building and the overturned bucket. Noah's expression cycled through surprise, then something that might have been embarrassment, then something else entirely, something quieter and harder to read, before it settled back into its usual composure. "I can stop," Noah said. "Don't," Eli said. He hadn't meant to say it. It came out before he could decide whether to say it. Noah looked at him. "Okay," he said quietly, and then, slowly, his fingers found the strings again. Eli stayed until the song, or whatever it was, that quiet and formless thing, came to its natural end. Then he walked back to the main house without saying anything else. He sat at his father's desk for an hour, and got absolutely no work done. The next evening, he found himself walking past the bunkhouse. Again, the music was there. He stopped at the corner, stayed in the dark. Listened, he told himself. It was just because the music was calming. He told himself this was a perfectly ordinary thing to do, that lots of people listened to music, that this had nothing to do with the person playing it. He stayed for 45 minutes. When he went back to the house, he stood in the kitchen for a long time with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, and he thought very carefully about absolutely nothing. There is a particular kind of closeness that grows between people who work hard together every day in a place that has its own demands and its own rhythms. It isn't the closeness of shared entertainment or chosen common ground. It's something more fundamental, built out of shared effort and shared quiet and the knowledge that the person next to you understands, without explanation, exactly what you are carrying. This is the kind of closeness that had always existed between Eli and his father, and later, in a smaller way, between Eli and Marcus, who had been working the ranch now for 2 seasons and who understood, without being told, when Eli needed help and when he needed to be left alone. The closeness that began to grow between Eli and Noah was different. It was quieter, for one thing, and stranger. It started in the small transactions of working days. Eli had a habit, when he was checking the cattle in the early morning, of stopping at the same spot on the ridge above the east pasture, to drink from his thermos and look over the land. It was a 5-minute ritual, personal and quiet, and he had never shared it with anyone. On the 14th day, he arrived at the ridge to find Noah already there, not waiting for him, not even aware he was coming, just standing there with his own mug, looking out over the pasture with that particular quality of attention he seemed to bring to everything, as if he was trying to understand the land, to read it, to memorize it. Eli stopped a few feet away from him. Noah heard him and turned, and there was a moment of brief mutual surprise that resolved, on both sides, into something that wasn't quite awkward but was adjacent to it. "I can go," Noah said. "No need," Eli said. He stood beside him, They stood there for 5 minutes, looking out over the east pasture in the soft gold light of early morning, and neither of them said a word, and it was not uncomfortable. It was Eli searched for the right description, and couldn't find it for a long time. It was like the silence of the land itself, patient, full of something that didn't need to be named. He was there the next morning, too, and the morning after that, within a week. It was simply part of the routine. They would arrive at different times, from different directions, and they would stand on the ridge and drink their coffee and look at the land, and occasionally one of them would say something about the herd, or the weather, or the condition of the fence line, and the other would respond, and then they would both go back to the silence. It was the most comfortable Eli had been in the presence of another person in a very long time. He recognized this. He recognized it the way you recognized something that was both new and strangely familiar. The way you sometimes recognized a song you hadn't heard before, but felt as if you already knew. He recognized it, and then he filed it in the part of himself where complicated things went. Because he had a ranch to run, and a crew to manage, and absolutely no time for the particular complexity of what he was beginning to feel. There was a day in the 3rd week when it rained from noon until dark. A steady, serious rain that made outdoor work impossible and forced everyone inside. The hands occupied themselves with equipment, maintenance, and card games in the bunkhouse. Eli sat in the barn doing tack repairs, a task he found meditative in its repetitiveness. He was an hour into it when Noah appeared in the barn doorway, rain wet at the shoulders, holding a tray with 2 mugs on it. Eli looked up. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten," Noah said. "I made soup. There's enough for everyone, but I thought," he paused, "I'll just leave this here." He set the tray down on the nearest surface and turned to go. "You can stay," Eli said, "if you want. There's more tack that needs doing." Noah looked at the pile of tack, then at Eli. "Okay," he said. He stayed for 3 hours. They worked mostly in silence, occasionally talking not about anything important, not about feelings or histories or the complicated interior lives that both of them were clearly in their different ways carrying. They talked about the tack, about the horses, about a technique for saddle repair that Eli's grandfather had taught his father and his father had taught him. At some point, without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, Noah began to tell Eli about growing up in San Antonio. Not the full story, not the weight of it. Just the surface texture, the heat, the neighborhood, the way the city moved and sounded. And Eli, who almost never asked personal questions, because he almost never wanted to offer the reciprocal personal answers they inevitably invited, found himself asking them anyway. "What made you want to do this?" he said, at one point. "Ranch work." Noah was quiet for a moment, working a leather strap through a buckle. "I needed to go somewhere different," he said finally. "Somewhere quiet." He paused again. "Somewhere my own brain couldn't be quite so loud." Eli understood this completely and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Noah glanced at him sideways. "Is it always this quiet here?" he asked. "Usually," Eli said. "I like it," Noah said simply. Eli looked down at the leather in his hands. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too. There is a particular torture in the act of noticing someone. It is not the dramatic torture of sudden love. Nothing about this was sudden. Nothing was dramatic. It was quieter and more insidious than that. It was the accumulation of small observations, each one individually harmless, collectively constructing something that Eli was increasingly unable to ignore. The way Noah's hands moved when he worked, careful and deliberate, unhurried in a way that was unusual in physical labor, as if he understood that rushing was its own kind of waste. The way he stood with one shoulder slightly lower than the other when he was tired, which Eli noticed because he had started noticing everything. The sound of his laugh, which was rare, and which, because it was rare, was something Eli found himself cataloging with a specificity that alarmed him when he examined it too closely. It happened mostly when Danny or Ray said something that surprised him. It wasn't loud or performative. It was short and genuine and quickly contained, as if he'd been caught off guard and recovered quickly. And the brief, unguarded moment of it was somehow the most real thing Eli had seen in a long time. The way he looked at the land, this was the one that undid him most consistently. Noah had begun to carry a small notebook in his back pocket, and in the evenings, or on breaks, or during the quiet minutes they shared on the ridge in the morning, Eli had noticed him writing in it, or sometimes drawing, small, quick sketches that he kept close to himself, never sharing them, never explaining them. One morning, Eli arrived at the ridge to find Noah already there, and Noah was drawing in the notebook, not looking up, absorbed. Eli stood quietly for a moment, not wanting to interrupt, and he could see from where he stood the shape on the page, the long sweep of the east pasture, the distant cedar line, the way the morning light was hitting the grass in long horizontal stripes of gold and shadow. He was drawing the view that Eli stood here and looked at. Every single morning, he was seeing what Eli saw. Something tightened in Eli's chest so suddenly and so completely that he had to breathe very carefully. For a moment, before he could move, he stepped forward, and his boot found the ridge properly, and Noah heard him and looked up. "Sorry," Noah said, beginning to close the notebook. "Let me see," Eli said. It came out simply, without performance or strategy. Just honestly. Noah hesitated, then held the notebook out. Eli took it. He looked at the sketch for a long time. It was not technically perfect. The perspective was slightly off. The proportions of the cedar line imprecise, but there was something in it that was more true than technical accuracy. A quality of seeing the land that captured not just what it looked like, but what it felt like. The patient enormity of it. The way it held the morning light. He handed the notebook back. Noah took it without looking at him. "It's not very good," Noah said. "It's honest," Eli said. "That's better." He felt Noah look at him then. But he had already turned to face the pasture, and he stayed that way, watching his land, while beside him the scratch of pencil on paper resumed. They stood there for 20 minutes. And Eli's heart was doing something complicated that he refused. That morning, to fully acknowledge, he acknowledged it 2 nights later, alone in his father's office at 11 o'clock at night, when he was supposed to be doing invoices and instead found himself staring at the wall. He was 22 years old. He had been running this ranch for 3 years. He had not had time for, he had not allowed himself the space for feelings, not the messy, consuming, derailing kind. He had worked, and worked, and worked, and told himself that there would be time later for the softer things, that the ranch came first, that he owed it to his father to keep this place alive before he worried about keeping himself. And then this young man had arrived at his fence line at 5:30 in the morning, red-eyed and tired, and holding himself together with visible effort. And Eli had handed him a thermos of coffee. And somewhere between that moment and this one, something had gone very seriously wrong with Eli's careful, managed, controlled interior life. He didn't call it love. He wasn't ready to call it love. He called it a problem. He sat with the problem for a long time. He was honest with himself, because dishonesty with himself had always seemed like the most exhausting possible option. He looked at the feeling clearly, naming its parts, the specific and relentless quality of his attention when Noah was in the room, or the field, or the barn. The way his mornings had restructured themselves around the ritual on the ridge. The fact that he knew the sound of Noah's boots on gravel well enough to identify them from 30 feet away. The warmth that spread in his chest when Noah laughed. The way he had been sleeping better, actually sleeping. The deep and dreamless kind, since Noah had arrived. As if something that had been restless in him had, without his permission, settled. He sat with all of this. Then he put it in the part of himself where complicated things went. And he turned back to the invoices. And he told himself that it would be fine. It would not, it would turn out be fine, but he didn't know that yet. The annual Blanco County Rodeo was the kind of event that was simultaneously just a rodeo and also, if you had grown up in that part of Texas, something considerably more than just a rodeo. It was the social gravity of the whole region for one long weekend in late April. Everyone came, from ranching families 3 generations deep to the newest arrivals. From the old men who had been watching barrel racing since before the arena had a permanent structure, to the young children for whom everything was still extraordinary, Eli had been attending since he was 3 years old, strapped into a carrier on his father's back. He went every year without thinking about it. He had already planned to bring the hands, give them the Saturday off, and make a weekend of it. Because it was good for morale, and because there was a livestock auction on Sunday morning that he needed to attend. What he had not planned for was Noah. Not Noah specifically. Not the particular way that Noah at a rodeo in the late afternoon light, wearing a borrowed hat from Danny that was slightly too big and sat low over his forehead, looking at everything with the open and wondering attention of someone experiencing something for the first time, would restructure the entire weekend in Eli's internal experience. They arrived in 2 trucks, Eli in front, Marcus riding shotgun, and the others piled into the second vehicle. The Garza brothers immediately vanished into the crowd with the particular energy of young men who knew everyone within a 20-mile radius. Pete found a spot near the arena fence and settled into it for the duration. Marcus went to look at the livestock. Eli should have gone with Marcus instead. He found himself walking in the direction of Noah, who had stopped at the edge of the arena and was watching the warm-up activities with his head slightly tilted. Notebook, of course, the notebook already in his hand. First rodeo, Eli said, stopping beside him. Noah glanced at him. That obvious? You have the look. What look? Eli almost smiled. Like someone trying to memorize everything at once. Noah looked back at the arena, and there was something in his expression that was very close to the expression he wore on the ridge in the mornings. That specific quality of paying full attention to something, of being entirely present in it. Eli found this quality, in Noah, consistently and unreasonably moving. Noah paused. I've read about this. Rodeos, but reading about something is completely different from he gestured. A small and helpless gesture. At the arena, and the crowd, and the smell of livestock and popcorn, and the particular late afternoon Texas light that turned everything amber. This year, Eli said. They stood there watching the warm-up together, and then the events started. And Eli spent as much time watching Noah watch the rodeo as he spent watching the rodeo itself. The way Noah's eyes tracked the barrel races, catching the mechanics of the turns. The way he leaned forward slightly during the roping events, as if proximity would help him understand. The way he wrote quickly in his notebook between events, not looking down at the page, keeping his eyes on the arena. A skill Eli found fascinating, and said nothing about. At some point. Eli couldn't have said exactly when. They stopped standing side by side, and started walking together. Moving through the fairground areas, the food stalls and the livestock exhibitions and the small local vendor booths. It wasn't a decision. It was simply what happened. Noah bought a paper cup of honey from a local beekeeper, and tasted it standing in front of the booth with a focused seriousness, and then bought 2 jars. He stopped at a booth selling hand-tooled leather goods, and studied the work with the attention of someone trying to understand the technique. He talked briefly with an elderly woman selling preserves, asking her questions about her process with the same quality of genuine interest that he brought to everything. Eli stayed close. He told himself he was just nearby. He was not just nearby. They were standing at the edge of a craft booth. Noah, looking at a display of hand-painted signs. When a voice called out across the crowd, Eli Calloway. Eli turned. The man who was pushing through the crowd toward him was broad, blonde, smiling in the way of someone who was very confident of his welcome. His name was Garrett N. He was 24, from the neighboring N Ranch, and had grown up alongside Eli in the way that children on neighboring properties grow up alongside each other, close enough to be familiar, never quite close enough to be friends. Been a while, Garrett said, extending his hand. Eli shook it. Garrett, he said. Garrett's eyes moved to Noah. Who's this? He asked, with the easy friendliness of someone who assumed all questions were welcome. New hand, Eli said. Noah Reyes. Noah Garrett N. Garrett extended his hand to Noah with a broad smile. Nice to meet you, he said. And he said it with the particular warmth of someone who had decided they liked you before you'd done anything to earn it. You settling in all right? Ranch life's a big change if you're not from around here. I'm figuring it out, Noah said. He shook the hand. His voice was its usual quiet. Garrett laughed warmly. Well, Eli's the best there is. If he's teaching you, you're learning from the right person. He glanced at Eli when he said this, and there was something in the glance, friendly, knowing, the particular look of someone who thought he understood things, that made Eli's jaw tighten slightly. They talked for a few more minutes. The three of them, mostly Garrett, who was easy in conversation in the way that some people are, filling silences without effort and moving from topic to topic with the comfort of someone who had never been at a loss for words. He asked about the ranch. He mentioned a livestock deal he was considering. He suggested they all get a beer, and when Eli said they needed to find the rest of the crew, he accepted this with the same easy smile and said they'd have to do it properly next time. As he walked away, he turned back once and said, "Nice meeting you, Noah. You're welcome at our place anytime." He said it with a smile. A warm, open, entirely friendly smile. Noah nodded politely. Eli watched Garrett go and said nothing, but something had tightened in his chest during the past 10 minutes that had nothing to do with the heat or the crowd or the volume of the rodeo. And when they turned away from the craft booth and walked back toward the arena, he was aware of Noah beside him in a way that was different from before, sharper, more uncomfortable, freighted with something he didn't want to examine. It took him until that night, lying in his bed in the main house while the bunkhouse was still lit up with the sound of the others unwinding, to admit what the feeling was. It took him longer still to admit that. There was no reasonable justification for it. He was jealous of a 10-minute conversation, of a man who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Eli lay in his bed in the dark and had a very serious internal conversation with himself, and none of it resolved anything. And eventually he fell asleep because the ranch would start again at 4 in the morning whether he had resolved anything or not. April became May. The days lengthened, and the work intensified with the season more pasture rotation, the beginning of summer preparations, infrastructure maintenance that needed to be finished before the real heat set in. Eli drove the pace hard, the way he always did in May, and the crew matched him. And for 2 weeks the rhythm of the ranch was almost purely practical, almost purely physical, with little room for anything that wasn't task or rest. But May also brought evenings that stayed light longer, and warm nights that made the covered porch of the bunkhouse an obvious gathering place. And the sound of Noah's guitar drifting through the soft, dark air became a fixed part of the ranch's evening landscape in a way that Eli suspected had become as natural to the other hands as the sound of the creek. He still listened from the corner. He was aware that this had become a habit. He was aware that habits had meanings. He was also aware that he was not ready, yet, to change the habit. And so, he simply remained inside the contradiction of it, standing in the dark at the edge of the bunkhouse every evening, staying long enough to feel something he had no name for, and then returning to the main house, until the night that Noah was not at the corner. He was on the porch with everyone else. Eli rounded the corner, expecting the usual privacy, and found instead the entire crew, Marcus, Pete, the Garza brothers, and Noah gathered on the porch in the yellow light, with Noah in the chair that had somehow become his, the guitar across his lap, playing for an actual audience. Eli stopped. No one had seen him yet. He was still at the edge of the light, and they were absorbed in the music. And he had just enough time to consider leaving before Danny spotted him and called out, "Boss, come on." And then there was no leaving without making something of it, so he stepped up onto the porch. There were no empty chairs. Someone handed him a beer. He leaned against the post at the far end of the porch, in the shadow at the edge of the light. And he watched. Noah was playing something different tonight. Not the quiet, formless thing from before, but something with more shape to it, still restrained, still characteristically quiet, but something that had the particular emotional architecture of a real song, something built intentionally, with beginning and middle and something you couldn't quite call an ending, but that nonetheless resolved. He was not looking at the audience while he played. He was looking at the floor. His eyes were half closed, and his hands moved with that focused gentleness that Eli had been watching for weeks, and there was something entirely private and entirely present in his expression, as if the music was a conversation he was having with himself, and everyone else was just sitting close enough to hear. Pete, who had never been seen to show strong emotion about anything, was nodding slowly. Marcus had his forearms on his knees and was leaning forward. The Garza brothers, remarkably, were silent. The song, if it was a song, if you could call it that, ended gently. No dramatic finish, just the strings quietly settling into stillness, and a moment of shared quiet that felt deliberate and necessary. Man, Danny said eventually, with genuine feeling, where did you learn to do that? Noah looked up. In the porch light, something moved across his face, not embarrassment, exactly, but the look of someone who had been further inside themselves than they'd intended, and was stepping back out. Myself, mostly, he said. I had a guitar and a lot of quiet evenings. Play another one, Ray said. Noah's eyes moved, and they found Eli. It was brief. It was just a glance, a natural scanning of the gathered faces, nothing more. But Eli was standing at the edge of the light, and Noah was right in the center of it, and the glance found him and held, for just 1 second, one single, still, second, before moving on. Noah played another. Eli stayed until it ended. Then he said goodnight to the group and went inside. He sat in the kitchen for a long time. He thought about the look. The 1 second look in the porch light. He thought about the fact that out of all the faces on the porch, Noah had found his. He thought about what that could mean, and then he thought about what it probably meant. And then he thought about everything he was risking, the ranch, the professional dynamic, the functional working relationship he'd built with someone who was good at his job, and who Eli genuinely increasingly needed if he misread it. If he misread it and said something. If he said something and it was wrong, he went to bed. He did not sleep well. The storm that came in the second week of May was fast and serious. They'd had warning, the forecast had been tracking it for 2 days, and the ranch preparations had started early. Livestock moved to shelter, equipment secured. The older barn doors reinforced against the predicted wind. Eli ran the operation from the field, moving between stations, making sure everything was right. The crew worked fast and competently, the way they had learned to work, and by the time the sky turned that particular greenish-gray, that meant it was coming now. They had done everything they could. Most of the crew sheltered in the bunkhouse. Eli sheltered in the main barn. He was checking on the horses. They were restless, ears back, the way horses got when the pressure dropped when he heard someone come in behind him. He turned, expecting Marcus. It was Noah. He was wet already, the rain having started in the last 10 minutes, and his hair was flat against his forehead. And he looked at Eli with an expression of calm practicality. Marcus sent me to help with the horses, he said. Smart man, Eli said. They worked together, in the barn, while the storm broke outside. A proper Texas May storm. Dramatic and loud, the kind that sounded like it meant something. Thunder moved through the structure in waves. The rain on the roof was a sustained roar. The horses, already managed but still uneasy, required near-constant calm presence and soft voices. Noah was good with them. Better than Eli had expected. Better than most first-season hands were at the 6-week mark. He moved through the stalls with a steadiness that communicated itself to the animals, and his voice, when he spoke to them, was quiet and even in a way that suggested he had done this before or was so naturally suited to it. That experience was almost beside the point. They worked without talking much. The storm was too loud for comfortable conversation, and the work required enough attention that silence was the more practical option anyway. But at some point, it might have been an hour in, when the worst of it was passing and the thunder had moved east and the rain had settled from dramatic to steady, they both ended up near the back of the barn, near the stall of the oldest horse, a mare named Compass, who had been with Eli since she was a filly and who was the most reliable animal on the property in every condition except electrical storms, Compass was restless. Noah was standing at her stall, talking to her in a low, continuous murmur that was almost not words, almost just sound, and one of his hands was flat against her neck, steady and patient. Eli stopped near him and watched, and Compass gradually, over the course of about 5 minutes, settled. "She likes you," Eli said quietly. Noah glanced at him. "She's scared," he said. "She just needed someone to stay." Something landed in Eli's chest. He didn't say anything. Outside, the storm kept moving east. The rain on the roof slowed to something you could talk over. "Can I ask you something?" Noah said, still looking at Compass. "Yeah," Eli said. "Why do you run this place alone?" He paused. "I mean, you have a crew, but it feels like you're the only one who actually lives here. Like you're the only one who's here, even when you're not working." He paused again. "That probably sounds strange." "No," Eli said. He looked at the mare. He thought about how to answer this, and then he decided to answer it honestly, which was unusual for him in personal matters. "I inherited it at 19, he said. "When my father died, there wasn't anyone else, and I'd been watching him run it my whole life, so I knew how, or thought I did." He paused. "I've been figuring out the difference between knowing how to do something and understanding." "Why you do it for 3 years now?" Noah was quiet for a moment. "Do you understand it yet?" he asked. Eli considered. Getting closer, he said. Something changed in the quality of the silence between them. It was the kind of silence that happened when two people had been standing close to each other for a long time, doing the same work, and had said something true, and the truth of it was sitting in the air. Eli became aware, with a sudden and acute specificity, of how close Noah was standing. Not inappropriately close. Just the natural proximity of the barn, the stall, the work they'd been doing side by side. But the rain had slowed, and the thunder had passed, and there was nothing to be loud over, and he could hear Noah breathing. And he could see, in his peripheral vision, the line of Noah's jaw and the slight downward angle of his head as he looked at Compass. And the warmth coming off him was a physical thing in the cool, rain-damp air of the barn. Eli took a careful step to the side. "Just a small one, a necessary one. Storm's moving off," he said. "Yeah," Noah said. Neither of them moved to leave. Compass blew out a long breath and dropped her head, finally settling. "She's okay," Noah said quietly. "Yeah," Eli said. He looked at the mare. He breathed carefully, and then, very deliberately, he turned and walked to the barn door to check on the weather, because there are moments when the only responsible thing you can do is put physical distance between yourself and something you don't trust yourself near. He stood in the doorway in the rain-clean air and looked at his land and breathed. Something changed after the storm. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would have noticed. But Eli noticed it because he was paying attention with the specific and exhausting focus of someone trying very hard to manage something by being rigidly practical about it. He pulled back, not from Noah's work. Noah's work was excellent, and Eli's professional opinion of him continued to rise in a way that was entirely separate from everything else. Not from the daily management of the crew, but from the small personal acute. From the mornings on the ridge, he started going earlier, before Noah arrived, and leaving before he showed up. From the bunkhouse corner where the music came from, he made himself go inside after dinner, instead of pausing there. From the particular quality of attention he had been paying Noah for weeks, he filled the space with more work. He had a talent for generating work when he needed to. He told himself this was the sensible thing, that feelings, however complicated, did not justify professional complications. That Noah was a good ranch hand who deserved to work in a clear and professional environment. That Eli had things to protect. The ranch, the crew dynamic. Noah's comfortable employment, that mattered more than whatever was happening in his own chest. He was very persuasive with himself. He was also, as became apparent within 2 weeks, wrong. The first sign that something had shifted was Noah's posture. He worked the same. His effort never flagged. His quality never dropped. But there was a change in the way he carried himself, that Eli, who had spent months learning the language of Noah's body, could not fail to notice. A slight closing inward, the lower shoulder dropping a little more. The moments on breaks where his gaze went to the middle distance, and stayed there with an expression that Eli couldn't fully read, but that felt like the same expression he'd been wearing on the fence post at 5:30 in the morning. The morning visits to the ridge had stopped. Not because Eli had stopped going, he had, but because Noah had also stopped, and the absence of them was a different kind of presence. The music on the bunkhouse porch was quieter too, though maybe Eli was imagining that the Gaza brothers mentioned it on a Tuesday afternoon. To each other, not to Eli, but in the vicinity of where Eli was working. "Noah's been quiet this week," Danny said. And Ray said, "He gets like that sometimes. Leave him alone." And Danny said, "I didn't say anything. Just noticed." And Ray said, "Don't notice at him. He doesn't like it." Eli kept working on the waterline he was repairing. He noticed he said nothing. The situation clarified, with painful and unexpected specificity. On a Thursday, Eli was in the equipment shed doing a repair on the tractor when Marcus came in with the particular expression of a man who needed to say something and wasn't sure how. "Got a minute?" Marcus said. "Working," Eli said. "I know," Marcus said. Still, Eli put down the wrench. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was 25 and from Oklahoma, and not a man who involved himself in business that wasn't his, which meant that when he decided something was worth saying, it usually was. "Noah's been asking about other ranches," Marcus said. "Jobs. I heard him on the phone last night. I wasn't trying to hear it. The wall's thin." Something ice cold moved through Eli's chest. "He'd give any reason," Eli said. His voice was level. "Not to me," Marcus said. But he paused, chose his words carefully. "He's not a quitter, that kid. If he's looking, it's because something's wrong." Eli looked at the tractor. "Talk to him," he said. Marcus nodded once and left. Eli stood in the equipment shed for 5 minutes. He looked at the tractor, thought about Noah's face in the porch light, the 1-second glance that had found him specifically. He thought about the ridge in the morning, and the coffee, and the drawing in the notebook, and the sound of a guitar in the dark and a hand flat against a frightened horse's neck. He thought, "I pulled away, and he felt it, and he thinks it's because of him," he thought. "He thinks he did something wrong," he thought. "I did this." He picked up the wrench. He was not capable of doing nothing with his hands. He found Noah that evening, not at the corner of the bunkhouse, not on the ridge, in the east pasture, where Noah had been tasked with checking the fence line and had apparently completed the task, and then simply stayed. Sitting in the grass near the creek bed, watching the water. Eli stopped 10 feet away. The light was going amber. That late evening color that turned the grass gold and made everything look like a painting of itself. Noah hadn't heard him approach, or if he hadn't turned. Eli sat down in the grass, cross-legged, beside Noah, not quite beside him, a careful distance away, but not distant enough to be a statement. Noah turned his head slightly. He looked at Eli with an expression that was carefully neutral, and the carefulness of it hurt in a way Eli couldn't justify. They were quiet for a moment. "I heard you're looking at other ranches," Eli said. Noah looked back at the creek. "I was thinking about it," he said carefully. "Why?" A long pause. "I thought maybe I'd overstayed the welcome," Noah said. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it. "You haven't," Eli said. "Something changed," Noah said. Not an accusation. Just a statement. "A few weeks ago, something shifted, and I figured if I was making someone uncomfortable being here, the better thing was to—" "It wasn't you," Eli said. Noah was quiet. "It wasn't you," Eli said again. "Something changed, but it wasn't because of anything you did. It was me, it was mine to deal with. And I dealt with it badly, and I made you feel it, and that wasn't fair." Another silence. The creek moved. A bird called somewhere in the cedar trees. "What was it?" Noah asked quietly. Eli looked at the water. This was the moment. He was aware of it with the particular clarity that certain moments had, where you could see exactly what was on both sides of the choice in front of you, and you understood that whatever you chose, you could not unchoose it. He had spent 3 years choosing the ranch over everything personal. He thought about what Marcus had said. If he's looking, it's because something's wrong, he thought. If I say nothing, he leaves. And I will have done that to both of us. I've been having a hard time being around you, Eli said. Noah went very still. Not in a bad way, Eli said quickly. Not I'm saying this badly. He stopped, breathed, started again. I mean that I've been having a hard time because I look forward to it too much. Being around you? And I didn't know what to do with that, so I started avoiding it. Avoiding you. And I know how that must have looked. And I'm sorry. Silence. The creek. The bird. The long, amber, uncomplicated light. You avoided me, Noah said slowly. Because you look forward to being around me. That is what I said, Eli confirmed. Another pause. That doesn't entirely make sense, Noah said. No, Eli agreed. It doesn't. He looked at the water. I'm not very experienced with this, Eli said. Any of this. I know how to run a ranch. I know how to fix equipment and rotate pastures and manage a herd. I haven't had a lot of practice with the other kind of thing. He could feel Noah looking at him now. He kept his eyes on the water. The other kind, Noah repeated quietly. The kind where you realize someone matters to you, Eli said carefully. More than they should, if you're just their employer. The silence that followed this was different from the previous silences. It had a texture to it, a weight that pressed against Eli's ribcage. I see, Noah said, and his voice was very quiet. I'm not trying to make anything complicated, Eli said. I know this is your job. I know this is already. I'm not asking you to do anything with this information. I just didn't want you to leave thinking it was your fault. Another long pause. Eli? Noah said. Yeah, Eli said. Look at me. Noah said. Eli turned. Noah was looking at him with an expression that Eli had never seen on him before. Not the composed quiet, not the focused attention, not the barely contained warmth that sometimes escaped at the corners when something surprised him. This was something more open than all of those things. Something that had been waiting, Eli somehow felt. For a long time, I have been getting up at 5 o'clock every morning, Noah said. To stand on a ridge with a cup of coffee, because you stand on that ridge with a cup of coffee. I have been drawing the same view every morning. I have been playing music in a place where I knew you could hear it. Not because of anyone else. He stopped. His jaw moved slightly, the way it did when he was choosing words carefully. I don't know what this is either. But it's not nothing. It wasn't nothing from the beginning. Eli looked at him. The light was gold and still, and the creek was moving, and the bird was quiet now. You slept in your car, Eli said. It was not what he'd planned to say. Noah blinked. Then something moved in his eyes that was close to the laugh, but different, warmer, softer. Something that caught in Eli's chest and held. I slept in my car, Noah confirmed. And you were out at the fence at 5:30 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, Noah said. I was nervous about starting. A pause. And maybe something in me, I don't know. Maybe I needed to see the place before I committed to it. And Eli asked. Noah looked at him. And then a man came out of the dark and handed me his coffee without being asked. He looked back at the water. And I thought, whatever this place is, whatever this is going to be, I want to stay. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Stay, he said finally. Noah looked at him. I'm asking you to stay, Eli said. Not just as a ranch hand. I'm asking you to stay and see what this is. The light was almost gone. The creek moved. Noah looked at him for a long time. In that quiet and specific way of his, with that focused and undivided attention that Eli had learned to feel like a physical warmth. Okay, Noah said. And in the golden last light of a Texas evening, with the creek moving and the cattle quiet in the near pasture and the cedar trees dark against the paling sky, Eli put his hand down in the grass, just there, beside him, his knuckles brushing, barely, against Noah's. And Noah's hand turned. and their fingers, slowly, and without drama, found each other, and they stayed like that, in the grass by the creek. While the light went and the stars arrived one by one and the land settled into its enormous, patient night. The thing about the Callaway Ranch was that it didn't stop for anything. Not for grief, not for seasons, not for the complicated interior revolutions of the people who lived and worked on it. The cattle needed water, and the fences needed checking, and the pastures needed rotating, and the equipment needed maintenance, and the invoices needed paying. And all of that continued, exactly as it had before. What changed was smaller and larger than any of it. It changed in the mornings, when they stood side by side on the ridge above the east pasture, and drank their coffee in the particular silence they had built together. And now, when their shoulders occasionally touched, neither of them moved away. It changed in the evenings, when the music from the bunkhouse corner was sometimes accompanied by Eli's voice, not singing. He would be very clear about this to anyone who asked. He did not sing, but occasionally, when something in the melody asked for a response, answering in a low hum that Noah acknowledged with a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, and never mentioned directly. It changed in the barn, where Compass had decided that Noah was a permanent fixture of her world, and expected him at specific hours, and where Noah and Eli now worked together with the ease of people who have learned each other's rhythms and no longer have to negotiate them. It changed at the desk in his father's office, where the invoices now sometimes waited until morning because there was something better to do with the evening, sitting on the main house porch, which had a better view than the bunkhouse porch, talking about nothing and everything in the warm night air. Noah with his notebook, Eli with whatever he'd been carrying around in his head all day. Both of them working through things in the way that two people can when they have built enough trust to think out loud near each other. It changed in the slow and careful way that things change between people who are both, in their different ways, not sure they deserve this, but are beginning to believe that they might. It was not simple. It was not without its moments of uncertainty. There were conversations that were hard. Conversations about Noah's life in San Antonio, the things he'd left, the reasons he'd left. The particular quiet courage of a 21-year-old who had packed everything he owned and driven 11 hours to start over in a place he'd never been, because he knew that something in his old life was slowly suffocating him and he needed to breathe. There were conversations about Eli's silence, the years of it, the habit of it, the way he had built himself into a person who could run a ranch alone and had never learned to build himself into a person who could let someone in. There were conversations about his father, which were the hardest kind, and which sometimes stopped and started over multiple evenings before they were finished. But the thing about two people who are both, at their core, honest, genuinely and uncomplicatedly honest in the way that some people are born and some people build, is that even the hard conversations eventually found their way through, and Noah drew the land every morning. And Eli learned, slowly and imperfectly and with effort, to say what he was feeling before he filed it away in the complicated part. And the ranch continued. In the last week of June, Marcus cornered Eli near the equipment shed. He had the same expression as before, the expression of a man who had decided something was worth saying. "Whatever you did," Marcus said, "it worked." Eli looked at him. "He's not looking at other ranches," Marcus said, and then he went back to work, as if this was all that needed to be said, which Eli supposed it was. The night that Eli would remember for the rest of his life, because there would be many more nights, many more years, many more mornings on the ridge with their coffee and the gold light and the patient land, was an ordinary Tuesday in early July. The heat had arrived in full, the way Texas heat did, decisive and total, and the day had been long and hot and deeply tiring in the way that only real physical work in summer heat could be. Everyone was worn down to their essentials by dinner time. After dinner, the crew dispersed, the Garza brothers to bed, uncharacteristically early, Pete to his corner, Marcus for a walk, which was his particular way of unwinding. The bunkhouse porch was quiet. Eli found Noah in the barn, not with the horses. Compass was settled, the others calm. He was just sitting in the open space near the barn door. in the cool that the thick walls held even in summer, the guitar across his lap. Not playing, just sitting, his head tilted back against the post, his eyes closed. He looked, in that moment, more at rest than Eli had ever seen him. All the held-in quality that was part of his particular mode of being in the world, the watchfulness, the composure, the careful quality of always choosing what to offer and what to keep, it was all just released. He was just a young man in a barn, in the summer, resting. Eli leaned in the doorway. He looked at him for a long time. He thought about the first morning, the fence post, the red-rimmed eyes and the forced composure and the borrowed thermostat. He thought, look at you now. And then, because he was learning slowly and imperfectly, but learning, he didn't think it quietly to himself. He said it. You look like you belong here, he said. Noah's eyes opened. He looked at Eli in the doorway. Backlit by the last amber light of the evening, something moved across his face. Something complete and warm and very quietly incandescent. The kind of thing that doesn't perform itself. That simply happens. I do, he said quietly, with the particular directness that was his most characteristic quality. Belong here. And Eli, who was 22 years old, and who had spent 3 years carrying his father's land and his family's history and his own carefully managed solitude, and who was only just beginning to understand that belonging to a place and belonging to a person were not, as he had always assumed, mutually exclusive things, came in from the doorway. He sat down in the barn beside Noah, close enough that their arms rested against each other, and neither of them moved away. Outside, the summer dark was settling over the Callaway ranch. The cattle were quiet in the pastures. The creek was moving. The cedar trees along the south boundary were going dark against the sky that was turning from amber to violet to the deep, clear, star-filled black of a Texas summer night. Noah's fingers found the strings, and he played something new, something Eli hadn't heard before, something that felt, in the particular resonance of it, like it had been written in the weeks just past, something that had the ridge in it, and the creek, and the sound of boots on gravel in the early morning, and the slow revolution of a season on working land. Eli listened. His eyes were closed. His shoulder was warm against Noah's. And somewhere in the music, without drama or announcement, something that had been tight in him for 3 years, the long tension of carrying everything alone, the managed and habitual solitude of a man who had told himself he didn't need anything soft, released, just like that. Like a fence wire given slack. Like a held breath. Finally let go. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The music said it. The warmth between their shoulders said it. The patient, enormous, living dark of the ranch said it. And the stars arrived, one by one, over the Callaway land, and the night settled in around them. And 2 young men sat in a barn in Texas with a guitar and a silence that was full of everything that mattered. And the world continued its quiet rotation toward morning. Epilogue. Morning. The sun came up the way it always did. First, just a suggestion at the edge of the hill, a faint brightening that the cattle noticed before the people did. And then slowly the long lines of gold across the grass, and then the full arrival of it, spilling over the ridge and filling the east pasture with the particular warmth of a Texas morning. Eli was on the ridge. He had his coffee. He had been there for 10 minutes, and the sky was doing what it always did, and the cattle were doing what they always did, and the land was carrying its enormous patience in its usual way. He heard boots on the grass, a familiar sound, a recognized sound, a sound that his chest had learned to open toward. Noah appeared beside him. He had his own mug now. He'd bought one at the rodeo plain, blue, slightly too large. He held it with both hands the way he always did, though the morning was warm now, not cold. He stood beside Eli. They looked at the east pasture. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The light moved across the grass. The cattle moved in their slow, collective way. A hawk appeared somewhere above the cedar line, circling in the warming air. Noah pulled out his notebook. He began to draw. Eli watched him draw for a moment, the quick, soft strokes that built up the land on the page, catching what the light was doing to the grass, the way the cattle moved, the hawk in the margin, and then Eli looked back at the land, his father's land, his land now, and beside him, someone who saw it the way he saw it, who understood, without it needing to be explained, what it meant to stand here and look at it. He thought about his father. He thought the old man would have said something simple and true about this. The way he did about most things, some plain observation that went deeper than it looked. Something like, "You can't run this place alone, son." Nobody can. He thought his father might have meant more than the ranch. He thought maybe he was only now understanding what he'd meant. "Still needs fence work on the north line," Noah said, without looking up from his notebook. Eli almost smiled. "I know I can do it after the morning check." "I'll come with you," Eli said. Noah looked up. The light caught his face, the dark eyes, and the slight curve at the corner of his mouth. That was its own language. The quiet warmth of it. "Okay," he said. And they stood there together on the ridge above the east pasture, with their coffee and their notebook and the long golden light and the land and the morning, and neither of them needed to say anything else. The notebook filled up. Noah started a new one. He drew the same view every morning. He drew it differently every time, and Eli watched him, and understood that this was what love did. It didn't flatten the world into something you already knew. It made you see the same thing every morning. Newly, the ranch continued. The cattle moved, the creek moved, the seasons turned, and two young men stood on a ridge in the early light and were not alone.
The end. If this story touched something in you, if you have ever been the person sitting alone at a fence post at 5:30 in the morning, trying to hold yourself together, hoping someone would simply show up, this one was for you. Eli and Noah's story is not finished. There are seasons ahead. There are storm and harvest and early morning and all the long, ordinary, extraordinary days that make a life. Drop a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the fence post, the barn in the storm, the ridge at sunrise? Like this story, subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Uh, like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching and keep watching.